You are now tuned into the Truth Frequency.
We are TFR. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Catherine Andrews.
Join us each week as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose. You'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Welcome to Spirit's Journey. We are coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio. We are also being simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio, iHeart, TuneIn, TalkStream Live, among others. So we are here in the heartland holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Catherine. Welcome, everyone. So this is a big period in life where a lot of people are waking up spiritually. And today we've got someone to help those beginning journeys into the spiritual world. We have Dan Bird today. So welcome, Dan.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So Dan's got two books, Waking Up in the Spiritual Age, and his follow-up to that is Finding Your Way in the Spiritual Age. So it's good advice for people who are just waking up, right, Dan?
That's what I think, because like Catherine said, many people are waking up right now. And it's just that kind of time in our history. And those folks that are waking up, there are many of them who have nowhere really to turn to get some basic information about what's happening. And I felt like I was called on to kind of provide some of that for those who need it. And those who need it will find the books, I think.
So how did you get started, Dan? How did all this start for you?
Well, it's a good question. I would say what happened is, as a child, I grew up in a small town. And by the way, for your listeners, thank you for putting up with this voice. This head cold has dropped my normal voice an octave or two. I don't usually sing like Barry White, but I probably could now.
But got a very distinguished voice now.
It's very, I should do History Channel stuff, I think. When I grew up, I lived in a small town. My mom was raised a Catholic and went to Catholic schools. And we lived in a small town that did not have a Catholic church, and there wasn't one really close by at all. So from the age of the time I was born until about, I want to say about 9 or 10, I really did not attend church or mass or anything, even though I'd been baptized as a Catholic. And about that time, we moved to a different town. We moved actually to my mom's hometown, which was Falls City, Nebraska. And the Catholic church and the school that she attended were still very much in operation. So she enrolled myself and my siblings into that. And so starting in fourth grade, I went to a Catholic school, not having the slightest clue what was going on. You know, I just followed everybody over to daily mass in the big old church and just followed what they did, including the very first day when I walked up with my fellow classmates to communion, not having the slightest clue what I was doing. So that was my start in the Catholic school. And as I went on, I think, and this is a big important part for where I'm at anyway, I did not have the indoctrination, if you want to call it that, from the Catholic religion from the early days, preschool up until third grade. By then, they, taught you quite a bit of the religion. And I missed all of that, and it just, didn't lock in. So I questioned things quite a bit. I mean, never rudely or anything, but I always wondered, what's the deal here? And my biggest problem was I saw that guy up there in the church, and I wondered, how is it he has this connection with God and I don't have it? And how does he have that? And how did he get it? And how did he know? And what is the deal? I have to tell him the things I do wrong, in confession, to have them forgiven. How did he get that power? And I was real curious about that, and they could never give me a good answer. So I think I know it. And it took me a while to understand that by missing out on those first years, I would see things differently than my classmates who, for the most part, just accepted it as they said. And that made me kind of open up as I got out of high school and so on to look for better answers. And I started finding some spiritual books and so on that just kind of opened my mind.
Well, and that's interesting because before the age of 7, we're like a sponge more so than later in terms of that subconscious mind being open to picking up everything that's going on. So that was really fabulous that you actually had some space and, those first 7 years not to absorb anything. And that's really why you probably say, even though you were exposed to it from 3rd grade on, that it didn't stick, because those first 7 years are really the key years for getting, things embedded in that subconscious mind.
Catherine, I think you said it perfectly there. And I never thought about that part. I have grandchildren now and I'm watching them. They are truly sponges as little kids. But you're right, because that exposure was not there, it had very little effect on me. Whereas my classmates, like I said, they were kind of lockstep. And I don't mean anything against Catholicism, nothing against religion. For some people, it's probably fine. It just didn't answer, or it put the power in someone else's hands instead of mine, and I didn't understand that connection with God. But I think you're right. Those first years are the key.
Although I think that, I had a similar experience because I grew up Catholic. I didn't go to Catholic school, so I wasn't quite as immersed in it as it sounds like you were. But growing up Catholic, I think there is this trend where kids are growing up, you're used to following your parents and doing what your parents say. And a lot of that makes sense when you're younger because, they warn you, oh, yeah, this is dangerous and this is good to eat and things like that. And so you're looking for someone to protect you and kind of guide you in life so you can grow up. And so you get used to just kind of following along. So then when they took me to church, it was just kind of like, oh, well, this is what we do. We're Catholic and, we go to church and, oh, well, part of being in this church is, you go to confession and First Communion and all this stuff. And so it was just, kind of like, well, this is our family. This is what we do. And, we do this as a family. And so you follow along. It wasn't really until I was in college that I found, well, I could really do anything I want. And at first I went to a Catholic church there at the university because that's what I was used to. But then I started thinking, well, I could really do anything I want. And so then that's when I really started looking within to decide, well, what really resonates the best with me. So I think that, what you and Catherine were talking about, I think can apply to some people. But also I think that, part of it is just how you are raised and, growing up with your parents. And it isn't really very many kids who, just totally, I think, rail against what they were brought up, to believe and to do right away. I think that maybe happens over time as they get older, as they get out on their own and meet more people and have broader experiences, then, maybe people start to think about that. So.
Yeah, you're right about the college years, too. That's when I really started kind of looking around. And, I took a class on Eastern religions, for example, and they introduced us to Buddhism and so many of the different ones. Each week we looked at a different one in some detail. And I kept thinking, okay, well, why is the Catholic one or the Christian one, whatever, why is that the only one, which is what we were told over and over? Why are these people not, considered just as good, just as important? And all of that stuff, how it just kind of, if you're kind of open-minded, and that's like Catherine said early on about people waking up now. If you're waking up, you kind of have an open mind about things and you're willing to, allow things to kind of find their place in your own life. And that's what I found. And those folks that are so locked into things and can't expand on their own out, and they have to have somebody tell them everything, explain everything, and give them directions and orders. Those folks are just not quite at the point where they want to open up. They're fine where they're at. That's what works for them. But for those that are waking up, yeah, what you're doing with your radio program and your books and your shows, and when you go out and all the things that you do down there in Kansas City, those and my books and everything, that's all important for those people to get that knowledge that they need if they're ready for it and they want it.
Well, and the interesting thing about this topic of people waking up. I used to get so frustrated because, of course, when you're into the spiritual metaphysics, you're waking up, you're really in the minority. And I would always be so frustrated because I got into this when I was in my early teens and I couldn't find anybody who was interested in it. And so I finally, as I got into the study of astrology, found an astrologer named Jeff Green who actually talks about the theory that at any given time, 70% of the population is in what's called the herd mentality, which is follow along like a little robot, don't question anything, do what everybody else is doing.
Yep.
There's about 10% of the population that's in what we call the differentiation stage, which is or individuation, where we begin to have our own thoughts, God forbid we have our own thoughts as opposed to what everybody else is telling us. And then beyond that, so that's probably the group that, you're capturing with your amazing books is those people who are all of a sudden beginning to individuate and say, well, wait, I have my own mind. I have my own thoughts, right?
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. The 70%, those people who, and I don't mean to sound like I'm putting them down or anything, but they often just are not comfortable thinking for themselves and looking around with open minds and all that. They're more comfortable with the rules being set and them understanding them and follow them. So yeah, these books are for those folks that are opened up enough that they things are happening around us all the time. These little spiritual things, intuition, all the things that happen to everybody every day that we normally call coincidence. Those kind of things are happening to everybody, and most people do just ignore them, write them off, and they don't pay any attention. But these books are kind of telling them, look at it again. Think about if something keeps occurring and you're wondering, why is this happening? And I put some samples in the books and so on. Then maybe you should, look at it a little differently just in case, and that can open you up a little more. But I really saw on the bookshelves, I didn't see a lot of this aimed at really somebody just like you said in your early teens when you first started waking up to this, there wasn't anyone to talk to. That is a big issue, and it was a huge issue with me growing up too. And then I found a book that just kind of nailed it. I go, wow, this is very helpful. This is what I felt all along. And so now as we open up more, it seems like spreading that word however we can becomes vital.
So how did you wake up? Can you tell us a little bit about your waking up story and how you recognized what was happening over time?
Well, this morning, I was sound asleep. My wife reached over and kicked me, and the dog jumped on me. Oh, you mean the big picture. Okay.
I'll be more specific next time.
Okay. Well, let's see. Back in when I always felt something was different, even as a kid. I didn't have the amazing happenings that so many people that I've talked to have had. Where they could see their guardian angel, or they could see spirits, or little people, or they could hear voices. All the different psychic abilities that so many people have. I didn't have any of those things, but I always had an intuition that guided me. And by the time I was married and everything, I knew that was real, but I didn't have any words for it or any understanding. And I found a book called Your Mysterious Powers of ESP. I want to say ESPN because there's football on today. Okay. ESP. And I don't know how I got this book. I don't know where it came from. It was a book from the 1950s or something, but I'd never heard anything like this. And it wasn't a slick book, like you see sometimes. It was full of details and information, and it just kind of blew my mind. I thought, wow, this is how things are connected. It made sense. And that really started to wake up. But then I kind of went to sleep for 20 years or something. And a few years ago, a real good friend of mine who knew that I was interested in this, she said, here's a meeting of a group of people who are going to talk about these kind of topics. They have a monthly meeting. You should come to it. So one of my best friends, another Dan, went with me to the meeting, and my wife went too, and we were just blown away. Wow, people feel this. They have words for it, And I thought, I have found my tribe, or however you say that. And as I walked out of that building, and I put that in my book, as I walked out, I was walking on air. I literally felt like I was, 6 or 8 inches off the ground because I had found these people. And so that started really the big wake up. And that was probably 5 years ago or so. So I was already, getting up there in age a little bit, but it was something that's been my whole lifetime.
Well, and what I think is really great about your story, Dan, is that you didn't have this, spaceship that landed or, meeting your spirit guide in person, some of these big events, because I think a lot of people are waiting for this big event and, they feel like, oh, something's wrong because they didn't have this big awakening. But a lot of times it's just, you don't need the big awakening. It's just a kind of a subtle little nudge. And it doesn't mean that the awakening is any less important or significant than somebody who has a big, bam experience where they were, taken by their spirit guide to another planet or something like that.
I think Eckhart Tolle, the great author, deals with ego and all that. I think he's one of the only people I know who claims he was on a park bench at London and just boom, he was enlightened. Now, it's probably true because that guy is brilliant, but I think 99.9 of the people are like you said, Catherine. I think it's a slow process. I think it can often be a small step at a time. And if you find the right teachers, you find the right classes or the books or videos, they can help you. And those usually seem to show up at the right time. But it is a slow process, don't you think?
Well, I was actually just getting ready to say, I remember many years ago hearing about this Buddhist debate. And so there were these different schools in Buddhism where some of them would teach that enlightenment happens in these great flashes of insight. And so one moment you're almost like this normal everyday person. The next moment you're enlightened, like you're talking about with Eckhart Tolle. But then there's this other school of thought that says it's gradual and occurs over time. So they got together and had these long debates about which way it was, and what they finally concluded was sometimes enlightenment happens in great flashes of insight, and sometimes enlightenment happens gradually over time with lots of hard work. So
you wait a minute, you're saying they worked together and came up with this conclusion? Does this happen in this day and age?
Amazing. It is
amazing.
Well, this supposedly happened a long time ago. But I would have to say, though, that reflects my experience, because I remember as I got started in this field and started really seriously working with spiritual exercises and things to develop my consciousness, that there were times where I would have these great flashes of insight, and it was almost like this glimpse into what would be possible. But then sometimes, I would kind of come back to reality a little bit, but I would always have that memory of the experience, and I sometimes would call that like a peak experience. And then other times it would just happen over time where I'd be meditating day after day, and I'm like, well, why am I doing this? It doesn't seem like I'm getting anywhere. But then all of a sudden I would look back over the last 6 months or 9 months of my life, and I would realize, oh my gosh, wow, I've really changed a lot. This has really been causing some kind of a significant and real change in my consciousness. So I think that, both are really true, because there's other people that I've read about and have heard speak that, they talk about these great flashes of insight, and all of a sudden they had this epiphany. But then at the same time, I know from my practical experience and all the students I've taught that, for a lot of people, you kind of plod along and it takes a lot of work. But I think everybody can have those peak experiences.
I think you're right. And I think sometimes, sorry to interrupt, the peak experiences that you described, Patrick, I think are sometimes the little push that keeps you kind of on the path, because it's so easy just to relax off of it. And that's fine. Right. But those little peaks can fire you up and make you want to go the next step or understand more.
Yeah, I thought of it like the little carrot, it's sort of like the carrot that keeps you reaching, because it's like, I would sort of fall back into my regular life after that experience. But then I would always say, wow, it's like, this is real. There's something really happening here. And it would keep me going.
Well, and it was interesting, Dan, that you said that, after you had your, subtle awakening, that then you kind of went back to sleep for a while. And I know a lot of the students we've taught over the years, a lot of them stay on with the metaphysics, but some of them don't, which always shocks me, because I always feel like once you open that door, you can't close it. And in longer discussion with those folks, I've learned that a lot of times it's fear that causes them to shut down and not go any further in the metaphysics. And I know from reading your stuff that one of the jobs that you had in writing your books was to kind of lower the fear and uncertainty that people feel when they get into the spiritual realm. So how do you lower that fear for people?
You're right that, and that is, as you mentioned, was a key to certainly the first book and the second one as well. And where the third one goes, we'll probably follow that. It'll be, I think, 3 of them on this topic before I switch. But I just felt like once I started writing the books and they came through, and then your folks that are listening have to understand, I'm mostly a musician. I'm not really a writer. I'm not a guru. I'm not really knowledgeable. But there was a reason for me to start waking up this way. And that my guides just led me to the idea of providing something that would take away the fear, at least for those people first waking up. They have a couple of things happen to them. Like one example I gave in the book is, let's say somebody, for some reason, before they go to bed at night, there's a song comes on the radio just as they're setting their alarm. And it's a song that their mother loved, and their mom has been passed some years ago. And they thought, well, I haven't heard that in many years. And they get up in the next morning, and they're getting ready to go. They get in the car, and all of a sudden, that song or another song that reminds them of their mom comes on. They go, well, I haven't heard that one either. And so they go on to work. They get in the elevator to go up to their office, and somebody gets in the elevator a floor or 2 earlier, and gets off before they get off. And as this person walks by, they smell Chanel No. 5 or whatever, your mother's favorite perfume that they hadn't had for years. And then you get into the office and you have some pictures and a picture of your mother and one of your dad and then the kids and so on. Something happens and the picture of your mom is slanted or it falls off or something. By this time, most people ignore that stuff. They don't put it together. But if you start taking that in, you might say, wow, somebody's trying to tell me something or some little connection. And they're not always that obvious. But sometimes little things happen like that. And like you said, it scares people because they're afraid of all look at the fear that the world's kind of based on, and the ghost stories and horror movies and all that stuff, which are so-called entertainment. Which I don't like, because I just don't like being frightened because I'm a big chicken. But the fear that's going on should not be in the way of spirituality. And I think it's important that people understand that this is normal. It's absolutely safe. It's fine. Just, find the right people to be around, to talk to, and they can understand it. And some people just freak out too easy and they just get worried about it. And part of that is because what they're told by, I hate to say it, but some religious people will tell them this is, Satan and all this stuff, which is, you can't be farther from the truth. But long answer, sorry. Your thoughts? Are you still there? Uh-oh. I hear nothing. You guys have disappeared. I don't know if you can hear me or not. But I have no sound here. Oh, no. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello?
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 I can hear
I
you
can hear
guys.
you guys.
Hello?
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 Hello? Okay.
Real people, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. The Truth Frequency Radio.
We are also on Truth, as well as Truth Frequency Radio. Also, it's on Bonus Talk Radio, TuneIn, TalkStream Live, iHeartRadio, and we are here with Dan Bird today, and we're very excited to have him. He has 2 books. One of them is Waking Up in the Spiritual Age, and the follow-up to that is Finding Your Way in the Spiritual Age. And so we were talking about the process of waking up and how you might recognize that. So Dan, welcome back to the second half.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be back again.
Good. We're all technologically good here. So your books are published by Ozark Mountain Publishing. Where can people get a hold of these great tools?
Well, you can certainly go to Omaha or Ozark Mountain Publishing. They have a website. If you did a Google search, you could find it very easily. You can also get these books if you look up Dr. Dan Bird on Amazon. It'll show them to you right away, too. So they're easy to find. But Ozark Mountain Publishing is that's a good place to look. And also you can check my website. I have a website that you can get to, which is www.wakinguptospirit.com. Wakinguptospirit.com. One word.
Now, you said you were a musician, so you also have danbirdmusic.com, right?
Yes. I write a lot of music. I'm kind of a overachiever in a way. I've probably written 300 songs. I've recorded probably 40 or 50 of them. And on the website, I have access to about, I think, 35 of my original songs. The things that are different about a lot of my songs is I have a studio and I write the song, arrange it, play every instrument, play all the parts, do everything on that. And I also go out and play in bands, and I had a show last night in Red Oak, Iowa, in fact. So my voice is a little bit gone from that. But yeah, music is my writing music particularly is my favorite thing. And I have a solo album coming out real soon, too.
What kind of instruments do you play?
Oh, you name it. I I carry too many instruments with me. Last night's show, it's just a duo, myself and my partner Brian, and I took keyboards, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, banjo, 12-string guitar, harmonicas, like I said, piano and organ and all that stuff. So everything.
Wow,
just have
talented. Excellent.
And, a few weeks ago, Dan, we had on a music therapist named Jenna Leah Hoffman. And we had a great discussion about the importance of music and how it kind of opens you up, enhances inner listening, helps integrate the right and left brain. Do you think that the focus on music for you helped you get in touch with that inner self by kind of opening up to that subconscious?
That is a great question, and you're using your intuition to figure these things out. I can tell because you nailed it. I once went to I guess you would call her a high-level psychic, a good friend of mine who has really helped guide me a bit. And she once told me, I said, I'm not really good at meditating. She goes, well, you don't really need to meditate that way because when you're doing your music, creating music and making the music, that works as meditation. And I've always thought about that. And I thought that's very true. And they've proven that music affects people. And you've heard all these stories, I'm sure, in better detail. But for example, there was an example of elderly folks in a school in a home, and they were, led a pretty depressing life, as you can imagine. And they brought in some music and played some of the music from their era when they were teens or whatever. And all of a sudden, people who never react to anything were smiling and sort of coming alive again. So, yes, I think music is one of the strongest ways to connect with your spiritual side.
Love that. And so, Dan, I have so many people asking me when they look out in the world, they hear the news of all the crazy stuff going on, from censorship to political things to, pharmaceutical takeover of the country. When people ask you what's going on, what is your perspective from the metaphysical of what is going on in the world?
Well, it's interesting. When I write my books, the way I kind of got started on that'll lead to the answer to the question. I have spiritual guides that I feel very strongly, and they guide me a lot, and they will answer questions and these kind of things just because I'm a fast typer. And so they come through and I can just type the words and often not know what I'm typing till I go back and see it. And they've given me all kinds of intuitive directions. Now, I say my guides, it could be my own higher self, and they may be the same thing anyway. But they've given me some of these ideas, and the more I think about them and study on it, the more I believe they're true. The change in energies that we're feeling right now, I keep bringing this up to people around me. Why is there such turmoil in this world? Why is there such turmoil in our own government? And the divisions that are going on are so strong. And I believe it is because of the changing energies. You guys, I'm sure, have heard much more about the earth itself is changing energy, going to a higher level. And there are people on this earth who are absolutely ready for it. They're open to it. And this is not going to be an issue for them. But the other people that are fighting it, I think that's where you're finding the issues coming from more. In other words, there's a lower energy that's based on money, power, and all that. That lower energy is being replaced by a higher energy. But those folks who live in that realm of lower energy are fighting like crazy to keep the status quo. And I'm talking about, rich folks who are doing anything possible to keep everyone sort of down, all that. And I guess you could call it a lower or bad energy. The bad thing about it is, though, we can't just ignore it. We have to deal with it and clear it out. And that's what you're seeing, the rising of that really difficult lower energies. That's the way I feel. And the folks that are leading the spiritual charge are kind of the ones trying to make sense of it all for people. So I think that energy, another thing that I call it is I don't know why they gave me this term, that's a rising of the feminine energy. And I think that's very true. First of all, look at all of the women who are running for president and all these places. Look at the gains that are going on in women's rights and the things that the stepping up into power, stuff that should have been happening all along, is slowly getting stronger and stronger. And the feminine energy is a higher kind of a different approach. And we've been in this male-dominated energy for thousands of years. Be tough, be a man, smoke Marlboros, whatever it would be. And that kind of thing is sort of going away. But the fight to keep it there by those in power is, I think, what's causing the real problem.
It's interesting as you talk about that, because what my mind went to is something that we talk about in the natural health community sometimes, which is that sometimes you may feel all right, but that your body actually needs a certain amount of strength and flow of energy to be able to manifest symptoms. So you can be going along thinking everything's okay, but actually if you have these thoughts that are out of alignment with the natural flow of the laws of the universe, and so really it's basically some understanding of how to use your mind and your consciousness, and so it creates this imbalance of energy in your mind, and that creates an imbalance of energy in your body, and then over time that pressure just kind of builds up until it starts bursting out, and that's when you experience symptoms. And so I think maybe that's some of what we're seeing here is like this energy to change, and for our consciousness to go up to that next step has been building and building over time. And because there's enough people that are waking up, perhaps, we were able to provide that strength and that flow of energy so that, the symptoms can actually show up, and we kind of know more what we're dealing with now.
I think that's well put, Patrick, and I think we're seeing those symptoms in the fight to keep things in control on the physical earth, because I tell you, I can guarantee, and I have no right to say this, but I can guarantee you that we're going to overcome these problems that are going on. I think the rise of this positive, more nurturing energy that is coming on, and we're feeling it. And the folks that are against it are feeling it. They don't understand it. They have no idea. So they fight back, and they don't always fight cleanly. They fight back. But it's not, they're going to lose long term. I'm positive of that.
Well, in this past week in the news is a perfect example, Dan, of what you're talking about in terms of the rise of the feminine energy, because two major events. There is a vaccine bill in California that a bunch of male politicians up in Sacramento passed, taking away a lot of the rights of people to choose what they want to put in their body. And so it was moms that were protesting, nonviolent, very civil protesting outside of Sacramento. There was a grandmother and two moms that were just standing peacefully in front of the state capitol building there protesting, and they actually got arrested. Male police using force to arrest these women. And on another side, another big event, there's a wonderful group called Moms Across America, which is all focused on health for children, removing GMOs, removing glyphosate and other unnatural things from the food source. Mm-hmm. And a group of emails was discovered from a pharmaceutical company about this group, Moms Across America. And one of the men had said in the emails that he just wanted to beat the out of these moms. Mm-hmm. It was like, oh my gosh. And, the moms weren't afraid at all. They were saying, we're doing this for our kids, and they may have a lot of money, the pharmaceutical companies, but moms have something that they don't, which is the passion and the love in their hearts for clean food for their kids.
And the moms are going to win this. It's just a matter of time, and there will be lots of bumps in the road. It may take us a long time, and we're not done with the fighting, unfortunately. But the time we're done, we will be looking at that so-called dawning of the age of Aquarius that people have thought about for many, many years. But I think the thing that is most troublesome to me, and you don't want to offend anyone, but there are too many men in power in businesses and so on who have one thing they want to do, and that's get more power and more money. And people say, well, why does this person who's a millionaire, billionaire, whatever, why do they want more money? They can't even spend what they have. And my guides have told me it's because they don't have what they're really looking for. They're looking for spiritual guidance or knowledge or feeling or love or however you want to put it. And they don't know, so they just keep trying to get more money and power, and it's never going to satisfy them. That's why they keep going on and on and on. I mean, our president recently made it possible to take some of our parklands and go in there and allow fracking. I mean, this is incredible stuff.
I've been really disappointed with the environmental record of him. Like, just I can't believe the stuff that he's rolling back and going into parks and things like that. But I totally agree with you. Where, it's like there's this movement. Where I think people are waking up and when I look at history, I look at the fact that there have always been brutal dictatorships throughout the history of this country. But if you look at the evolution of government, we've gone from like a tribal culture to more of a national culture, and then representative government has been catching on around the planet. And so I think that no matter how much these people who are these dictators who want to control everything try to squash people's freedoms, the human spirit just keeps rising up. And the nature of our spirit is freedom and creativity. And so even though we're in these animal bodies, that's part of the dichotomy that I feel like we're experiencing, is that we're experiencing in this world in an animal body. I mean, genetically, we can look at the DNA and what we share with other life forms on this planet, but we are a spiritual being, so our consciousness goes beyond just this body. And that's where this confusion comes in, where people get confused by the experience. And so I think a lot of these very powerful, wealthy people, like you were saying, I think that's right on, that they have this hunger inside that they just can't fill. They can't satisfy it, but they're only looking physically at things in terms of satisfy it. So they just keep wanting more and more and more, hoping that does it. And I forget the name of there was this movie producer, I think he did work with Adam Sandler. Do you remember his name, Catherine?
Yeah, well, I know exactly who you're talking about. The name slips me. He did many movies with Jim Carrey.
Oh, it was Jim Carrey, yeah.
And it's Saddleback Productions, and he did the movie I Am.
Yeah, so anyway, he was describing how he had made it. And so he had bought this giant house because he had all this money coming in. He had these successful films behind him. And he said they got all the furniture moved in, and he walked in the door, everything was in place, and he looked around and he realized at that moment, I'm no happier now than I was before I had this house. And that's when he had his waking up moment. He's like, there's got to be more to this life than just acquiring material things. And I think that's where a lot of people are heading.
And that it's interesting you said that. In the book I talk about a guy who he gets out of college, he gets a job, and he's working at some not a great job, and he thinks, wow, if I could just get this other job, so-and-so, I will be happy. So he gets the job, and he goes, now, if I could just get I want this car, this certain car. If I could get that car, I'll be happy. And he gets the car. And then he says, now, if I could just find the perfect wife and all of that, and he gets that, and he's still thinking, well, now I need the perfect house. You see what I'm saying? It just goes on and on and on. Because the happiness they're looking for is within, and like you said, they're looking exterior, looking at stuff, and that's not going to satisfy them.
Now, one thing you like to talk about is that, sometimes people might feel like they're a victim because of their circumstances, but you point out that people have a choice. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, this is something I think came from my guides. I don't know where, the exact words came from, but I always said that, the last couple of years, when I've spoken at places, I go into this idea of anything that happens to you, good, bad, indifferent, whatever happens to you, there's usually a good reason for it. And you can start kind of looking at it and getting an idea of what you're to learn from it. But whenever anything happens to you, you can choose, you have a choice. First of all, you can choose to be a victim if it's, something that you don't like, or you can choose to be a learner. And those seem like kind of strange words to combine, but it's really true. If something happens, you get in a car accident or somebody's hurt or whatever, you can always choose the victim status. Poor me, blah, blah, blah. Or you can say, okay, this has happened. It's already happened. I don't need to be a victim. I'm going to look at it and say, what am I to learn from this stuff? If you do that, it changes the complete focus of what you're looking at. And I know it sounds much easier to do to say than do, because if you're in a car accident, you're not going to sit around, what can I learn from this guy bashing into my car? But the truth is, if you can take away the victimization part of it, you'll see it with different lights, and it can help you so much in daily life with small things. And also, one other thing I want to mention, besides the victim or learner, each and every day, we get to think about how our day is going to go. We get to, and each and every moment, believe it or not, we are not a result of what's happening around us. What's happening around us is more of a result of what we are and what we're thinking and the energy we're creating and moving around. I think a lot of people are just walking around the world letting things happen to them, and they always want to think that, oh man, I have nothing but bad luck. They sort of play that victim thing. And the truth is, if you can go within, and I know in your school you teach a lot of this stuff, which is wonderful, you can help people understand that what's happening within is what's going to, shoot out of them and create the situations around them and influence what happens around them. And I think that's real important too.
Well, I think that idea of the victim is huge, because when you let that go, you have to look within. And in my opinion, spirituality is about learning from every situation and seeing that anything that happens in your life is the result of you, either a thought or an action that you set into motion that then causes an experience to come to you. So anybody who's still in victimhood is not on a spiritual path, because they're thinking that the outside is affecting them. It works the other way around, from the inside out.
Yep, exactly.
That can produce, in my opinion, the biggest shift in thinking, is that, the world is a projection of what we're thinking inside. And so, a lot of people say, oh, I'm spiritual, but they still play the victim. So, do we need to be spiritual? And what exactly does that mean if I say I'm a spiritual person?
That's a very good point. And I always try to tell this people that when I have the opportunity to speak, either on a program like this or when I'm at a book fair or whatever, I always talked about that part. Do you have to be spiritual? Because some people get that idea, and again, you're looking at it almost as a outside of yourself sort of thing. And I always tell them, heck no, you don't have to be spiritual, whatever that is. You have to be what you are authentically. And if you want to use the word spiritual and those kind of ideas fit and they feel right to you, absolutely, that's fine. If you want to call yourself spiritual, great. If you don't want to, that's great. But, you think an example, somebody grows up in a jungle. They're not exposed to the outer world, and yet they live a simple life, and they have their own way of approaching spirit or God or the universe. And are they less spiritual because they don't know the terms and all this? Oh, heck no. They're just as spiritual. We know people in our own lives who don't know the faintest terms dealing with spirituality, but who go through life and treat people wonderfully, who live a happy, fulfilling life. And they may go to church, they may not go to church. They may be Buddhist, they may be anything. But they live a wonderful life, and that completely overrules all the other stuff. You can be totally spiritual and not have the slightest idea you are. Now, you can tell from outside by watching them, if somebody's mean and vicious and violent, they're probably not real spiritual at heart. But, there's always that other side too. They could be doing it because, well, that goes into a whole nother topic. The agreement they made before they were born, and they were going to be that way to help some other people, and so on and so on. But you have to buy the book to find more about that. But I think you don't have to use the word spiritual. You don't have to be quote unquote spiritual. You have to live your life the right way. The golden rule's the simplest way to do it.
I like that term authentic, that if we work to be authentic with who we are, and then also the term learner. I've thought of myself for a long time as a lifelong learner, and I think that has been kind of like this kind of a constant in my thinking, that I always wanted to constantly improve myself and better myself throughout this life. And I think if everybody just started really focusing on learning about themselves and learning about each other, then we can make so much progress. So how would you help people like learn the lessons maybe from like other people in their lives?
How would you help people learn the lessons from other people? Well, one thing that I think helps, honestly, for me, certainly, is if you can get in touch with other people that are like-minded or that are kind of awakened at the same or any level, I guess, talk to them, get their stories, kind of find out. There are groups in every city and probably most towns who get together and discuss these kind of topics. If you can find those folks, that can do a world of good. Now, the biggest, most important thing I can say, and I know you only have a few minutes left, but the biggest, most important thing I can say is all of the exterior information you get, whether it be my books or your books that you two have written, or your classes or online videos, or things people have talked about, none of that is as important as what you will find if you will take the time to go inside and find out for yourself what's happening. That all the outside stuff is good, and it can guide you, and it can help, and it can open doors. But if you're not actually looking within yourself, you just won't go very far. And I think I can't stress that enough. People just need to calm down their minds in a simple way. Just don't allow that ego to yap, yap, yap all day if you can. Find a way to quiet it. You can even mow a lawn and quiet down, or listen to music, or different ways. But those are really important if you want to move forward.
Excellent. Now, what about, we have about another minute here. And so when we're talking about people provide lessons for us, because you mentioned that before, that every encounter or situation provides lessons. Can you say something on that briefly?
Yeah, I think that's true. It's interesting how you'll meet somebody and you'll immediately like them for some reason or other. You'll meet someone else you really don't like for some reason or other, and sometimes there's no logic to it. And I think that's probably because of the reincarnation thing, where we often are with a group of people and we come back together and people play certain roles and everything. So when you meet people, try not to, if you can avoid judgment, that's a big part. You can learn from them one way or another what's going on. I think that's really important. It's just be open to what they're doing. You may not have to stay around them or listen to them or be involved with them, but you certainly can learn a lot from each individual just by kind of studying them and listening to them without pushing them too hard.
Well, Dan, thanks for being on today. It's been a real joy.
Well, it's been just a blast for me. I love talking to people, like-minded folks like you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So Dan Bird is author of Waking Up in the Spiritual Age, and his follow-up book is Finding Your Way in the Spiritual Age. Both of those are available through Ozark Mountain Publishing, and so I'm sure you can find those in most major bookstores, and also you can go to his website at wakinguptospirit.com. We love having you with us. Please join us again next week. This has been Spirit's Journey.
See y'all next week.